This is going to be a complete expedition checklist for everything that you need in New World Aeternum. Whether you're doing expeditions or dungeons, whatever you want to call them, if you want to know everything that you're going to need to have to make sure that these go as smoothly as possible, then you are in the right spot. If this video is useful and informative, please make sure to drop me a like and subscribe down below, as both those things massively help me out. And without further ado, let's jump into the video. So first things first, and quite simply, you're going to want to make sure you've got the correct build on. So of course, make sure you've got the correct gear that you want on, and that gear then fits into the correct weight class. Of course, light giving you the most damage benefits, medium giving you a bit more protections for the exchange of that damage, and heavy giving you less damage but the most protections possible. If you want to have a quick look at what all of your protections are, you can hover over your stats in the bottom left here, and it will actually give you a quick rundown of your physical damage resistance and your elemental damage resistance, so you can kind of see where you're at and if the build is going to be fair enough for you to play. Especially useful when you're going into mutations, because as you can see in the elemental damage resistance section, this is not going to be that great for mutations if it's any of the elements, because I haven't got that much protection for it, but I'm going to show you a way later in the video how you can actually prepare for these and be much better off at doing these runs with a general generic set. As well as doing this, you're going to want to make sure you go into your attributes and check that these are in the right positions, as in you've got enough points in each skill. So for me, I like to run 52 Constitution for most of my runs. I very rarely do M3s at the moment. I'm just doing M1s and M2s in my random daily queues, as well as the random regular dungeons. So 52 for the random regulars, and sometimes in an M2, depending on the team, I can then use a 48 Constitution buff food. Again, that's something we'll get onto, which bumps me up to that 100 mark, which gives me an extra increase of 10% of the base value to the max HP, which is great. 350 int, I'll make sure I've always got this on so I get the extra ability damage, and then because my main weapon is the blunderbuss, I'm throwing the rest into strength, and hopefully I can get another point very shortly so I can get up to that 200 mark, but the rest goes into there to do my damage scaling, using the fire staff as well, so that's where the int comes in useful. Basically, your constitution is going to depend on your role. Of course, if you're a tank, you're going to need lots more than the regular DPSs and the healers. But of course, it's going to come down to your experience and your skill, as well as the team composition you've currently got, especially when you're doing M2s or M3s. So make sure you take note of that and adjust accordingly. Alright, so once you've got your main build set up, your build is correct, you've got your attributes correct, the next thing you're going to be looking at is making sure that you have a weapon swap option if your main build is something different to what the enemy is weak to. So on here, you can see all the different types of weapons that you have and what they scale with, but if you actually go into your inventory and hover over a weapon, you'll be able to see that underneath the direct stats at the top and the gear score, it will tell you the type of damage. Now you can see the blunderbuss, for example, is thrust damage. If we go over to the fire staff, that one is fire damage. Now you can check each of these weapons as you need to, but I'm going to pop up on screen here and talk you a quick rundown of what each enemy is weak to. So Angry Earth is weak to fire by 30%, slash by 20%. So when I say by 20%, it means you're going to deal an additional 20 or 30% damage, whatever that number is, if you use that element versus these mobs, or that damage type versus these mobs. Ancients are weak to lightning by 30%, strike by 20%, and void by 15%. Beasts are weak to thrust by 20%. Corrupted are weak to arcane by 30%, thrust by 20%, and nature by 15%. Lost are weak to nature by 30%, ice by 15%, and strike by 10%, leaving the final one to be humans, or the Varangians, whichever you want to say. They're the ones that are in the Imperium Forge, and they are weak to slash by 20%. This is going to be important because, for example, let's say I'm doing Lazarus and I run in with a thrust damage blunderbuss and a fire damage fire staff. Because ancients are weak to lightning, strike, and void, maybe I want to swap out to the lightning hammer or the warhammer in general, as that's going to give me the strike damage. Maybe I want to switch to a void gauntlet to do a little bit more instead of my fire staff here. So depending on your build, you can swap out and deal yourself some additional damage, which is really, really nice. Next then, we're going to be looking at consumables. So of course, the first and regular things you're going to want are the health pots and the regen pots. These are going to be super useful for every single player in dungeons. Always make sure you have these. And along with these, you want to pair some regular tier 5 hearty meals. Again, in between fights, you can just pop these to continuously have that regen going. It's going to save your healer a little bit of slack, and it's also going to mean you can keep on top of what you're doing nice and easily. If you're not on a legacy server, it may be slightly harder to obtain more of these, as they are quite expensive to craft or to buy at the moment. But regeneration serums, particularly if you're doing M3s or raids, I know we're not strictly talking about raids here today, but these are going to be super crucial for those M3s. So you do definitely want to have some of these on your hotbar if you are able to. If not, the regular regens are fine. If you've got a good healer, you should be okay. But if you are struggling a little bit and you are on a legacy server, or your server these are not that expensive, maybe invest in some of them. Of course, honing stones for M2s and M3s is going to be super helpful. You can get these gold touched honing stones once per week. You can get 5 of them for a very small amount of doubloons from the Well of Fortune over in Cutlass Keys. So this is a really good way to keep on top of your honing stones. 5 is a decent amount, and really, once you get decent at the game, decent at your build, and decent at knowing what the mechanics of the dungeon are, you only really need to pop these when you're doing a mutation level 3. So that's going to save you quite a bit of them on your random queues, and then when you do get into those M3s, you can start to use these as you need to. You've then, on the similar vein to that, you've got the coatings, and you've also got the ward potions. The wards are going to give you an increased damage absorption from a particular type of enemy for 10% for 40 minutes, and the coatings are going to give you an additional plus 15% damage against this certain type of enemy, again for 40 minutes. These are going to be really good if you're in M3s and you wanted to get through the dungeon a little bit faster. They're not strictly needed. Maybe the ward ones are needed more at M3 if you are a squishier build. But generally speaking, these are not massively important until you get up to, again, mutation level 3. M1 and M2, you're probably going to be fine without them. M3, a lot of groups prefer you to run these. They're not massively expensive, but they are going to give you a very decent increase to damage and damage absorption versus the type of mobs that are in an expedition. So they can be a really nice little addition you can add on there. Then you could also look at putting incense on if you wanted to, and this is going to increase your resistance to all afflictions by 50 for 30 minutes. It's not massively helpful, but it can be helpful in some things like Blight in Genesis. It just stops you getting that quite as quickly, so it can be a useful thing to have on, but it's nowhere near as important as the rest of the stuff here. But one thing that is very important is going to be your stat boosting food. So really, roasted rabbits with seasoned vegetables giving you plus 48 constitution is going to be the big one for most players. It's going to be very helpful to give you that extra bit, and that's what I talked about in my initial section with the attributes there. I run up 52 constitution points and then eat this food to get myself up to that 100 mark. You can, of course, get different boosts for different stats, so you might want strength, you might want focus, you might want dexterity or intelligence, whatever it is, but you can go ahead and grab these, and you can get all the way up to 48 being the max, but 44 is much more common and cheaper. So if you've got enough points and you're just looking for a little damage boost, if you're only in M2s, certainly use a less good one. In M3s, you're probably going to want the 48 boosting one if it's possible. And as a quick add-on to that as well, if you have got high level cooking, you can run artisans flatbreads, which are just going to give you a little bit more of healing over time when you are healing instead of your regular food. But again, these are not necessary until you get to M3s or into the raids. So now we know what consumables and our build and what damage types we need, we're going to look at gems and specifically how they help in mutations. So for this, I'm going to put on my heavy bruiser or tanking set. And as you will see here in this build, I have opals in every single slot that I have here, and also in my ring and my earring. Now, the reason for this is it's going to give me a very good overall protection of 17.5 against every single element, which gives me a good base value. If I'm doing regular dungeons, this is going to be way more than enough, and if I'm doing M1s, this is probably also enough. But what you can do with this is actually then pair it with an amulet. So any amulet that has a protection, let's say this one here has got nature protection, I've of course then thrown on a nature gem with that, and if I swap that into my build, yes, it's going to give me slightly less gear score, but if we hover back over here, now you can see everything has 17.5 except nature, which has 38.3. So for M1s and M2s, if you've got a bit of dodging going on and you're staying out of the mechanics of that particular elemental mutation, that is going to be more than enough to keep you protected and make sure you don't get one shot by some of the elements if you do mess up once or twice, as long as you've got a little bit of con. So that's going to be a really effective way. Amulets, you can get any type of protection in the game. So another one here is Void, for example, or I've got another nature one here, a flame protection one here with another fire ward gem in. And what I recommend is whatever protection the amulet has, put the equivalent gem in as well, just to give you that extra boost. Now, if you are going on to M3s, 38% is not going to cut it. You want really above 60%. So what I would recommend doing is, of course, slotting gems into every piece. Let's say I was doing a nature one, I'd go ahead and put nature gems in all of my armor pieces and my other 2 jewelry pieces as well, to get that additional protection, which should pop you over that 60% mark, and that will allow you to complete the M3s much easier. Further to this, make sure if you are tanking, like you can see here, I've got a tanking set going on, you really do want to make sure you've got a tier 5 carnelian in these, as that's going to generate 350% more threat. So that's going to be super important if you are wanting to hold aggro of the mobs, so make sure you've got those in as well. And finally then, we are going to touch on perks. Perks are going to be super important, because they're going to mean you're going to take a lot less damage if you've got the right ones. As you can see here, we've got a pretty good piece on my helmet. This one is Enchanted Ward. Now if you're someone that played legacy versions of New World or previous versions on PC, whatever you want to call them, we have moved away from the system where you had specific wards, so Corrupted Ward, Beast Ward, whatever, and we've now got Enchanted Ward, which is minus 4% damage from light and heavy attacks in general. It also works in PvP, so this is a really good perk to have on every piece of gear. You're going to want to make sure you have that on as many pieces as you can when you are going through these dungeons, as it's massively going to help you survive. Additionally to this, health is another good option to have on there. As you can see, each piece that you have this on will increase your health by 2.4% of the base value. So again, particularly if you're in a tanking set, this is good, but it's generally helpful for all of your pieces. And then refreshing is going to reduce your cooldowns as well, so that's another great one to have on. The other thing that you're going to want to look for is your weapon perks. So as you can see here on my gloves, I've got Keen Berserk. Now, whilst I've got the Warhammer equipped as my secondary, it's not as helpful, but when I'm tanking with the hatchet in my hand, this is a good one to have, as it just helps me to improve my weapon abilities. Another thing you can get, as you can see here on my boots, I'm still looking for an Enchanted Ward pair of heavy boots, but this one has got physical aversion, which means that I receive 4.5% less damage from ranged physical attacks. So, of course, it's not melees and it's not magical attacks, so it's not quite as good as the Enchanted Ward, but it is still decent. Again, with the health on there, and of course the strike conditioning as well. So if mobs attack me with strike damage, I'm going to take 5% more absorption from that, which is great. When we're looking at weapon perks particularly, we're going to want Hated. If you are tanking on the sword, that's going to be very useful to generate more threat. And you're also going to want to look at getting an earring with Despised on, again if you're tanking, because that's going to generate more threat. If you're not tanking, make sure you don't have Despised, and make sure you don't have Hated or any Carnelians on, as that is going to really negatively affect the team. Other things you're going to want to look out for are going to be your protections, like I mentioned on your amulets there. You want Hearty on your ring if you can, as that is going to give you a 3rd dodge in most weight classes and most situations that you're in, which can be super helpful. And if I switch back over to my PvP style build, as I mentioned there, you're going to want weapon perks. So you can see Leeching Shrapnel Blast, which means that I heal for 35% of the damage dealt by Azoth Shrapnel Blast on my blunderbuss. It's going to be super helpful to have that on. If we go and look at my PvE Fire Staff here, this one is really good. It is, of course, from defeating the Gorgon raid, but it's got Empowering Meteor Shower, it's got Keenly Jagged, and it's also got this Disdained Infliction, which is the potency of my outgoing dots increased by 15%, which is really nice. I've obviously, of course, then got a Rune Glass in there, which is an upgraded version of the gems, which if you are on a legacy server, you'll know all about these. If you're a newer player, you are able to make these with 180 stone cutting and 180 weaponsmithing, or you can buy them from the trading post, and these can give you an increased amount of damage, but they also give you, like this one, hits inflict burn, dealing 8% fire damage per tick per second for 2 seconds, and you can constantly apply this every time it's out. So this is really helpful to have on weapons, and you can get various different ones. So along with your weapon perks, try to get some rune glasses if you can, if you've got a 725 piece that you're happy with, or 700 piece that you're happy with and you want to improve. If you are healing, Fortifying Sacred Ground is going to be an absolute must, especially when you get up to M2s and M3s as well. So healers, it's going to be slightly more important, but make sure you get in those weapon perks as soon as you can, because they're really going to help out your team. So that is pretty much going to be it for today's video. If you have found it useful and informative, please drop me a like and subscribe down below, as both those things massively help out the channel. If you've got any questions, feel free to leave those in the comments as well, and if you've got any additional expedition tips here for New World Aeternum, do drop those in the comments down below as well. Other than that, I would like to thank you for watching, and I'll catch you again very shortly in a brand new upload. So take care and peace.